You're listening to the Wellness Works podcast with Dr. Kris McClusky. This podcast takes you on a journey of lifelong health and wellness. We talk to top health experts and explore the real truth you're not always hearing about, the options you have to beat sickness and disease. And now, your host, Dr. Kris McClusky.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Wellness Works. I'm your host, Dr. Kris McClusky, your Metro East chiropractor and wellness expert. Podcast is gaining popularity at really record paces, I believe because of the content and the messages that we're sharing, and really the usability or the fact that when people listen to this podcast, there's things that they can put into their lives that are going to increase the quality of their life. And that really is our primary purpose, to help people live as high of quality of life for as long as possible. Now, in previous podcasts, we've really talked about neurology and chiropractic, and we've talked about alignment, and we've even dived into nutrition. And today, we're going to explore the emotional component to health and healing. And when I was a child, I just wanted to know how things worked. And I wanted to know how my toys worked, and then eventually I wanted to know how the world worked. How did the universe work? And that led me to studying the human body, because I found that, much like our guest that we're going to have on the call today, I had childhood health issues, and I wasn't getting answers from the traditional drug and surgery therapeutic approaches. And so I began to investigate, how does the human body work and what is the essence of healing? And I learned a lot. Probably the speaker that we're going to have connected the dots for me. I have Dr. John Demartini on the phone, definitely one of the most influential people that have shaped my career, and I'm just so blessed and honored. I can't even tell you guys, I've been giddy all day about having Dr. Demartini on the call. So Dr. Demartini, can you hear us?
I can hear.
Man, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely. Dr. Demartini, quickly, is a former chiropractor. He's a current American researcher. He's a best-selling author, international educator, and public speaker in human behavior. He founded the Demartini Institute. He's trademarked certain methodologies in human development, the primary two being the Demartini method and the Demartini value determination process. Gosh, he's been all over the globe speaking, educating, just loving on people. He's worked alongside John Gray and Jack Canfield and Michael Beckwith and Hugh Jackman and Ringo Starr, and you just name it. But I want to dive right into this because we want to be respectful of Dr. Demartini's time. And one thing that you helped me do, Dr. Demartini, is realize that if you look at how things work, how does the universe work, how does the body work, we're raised being told that there's really something called creation and something called evolution. And you really have to be a believer in science or a believer in religion, and you can't really merge the two. And after learning from you, I found that to be quite false, actually. Could you share a little bit about how you came to that realization?
Well, I've been, since I was 17, almost 18 years old, I've had a quest to want to learn as much as I can about the universe. I mean, I started studying with a gentleman named Paul Bragg, and he inspired me to want to master my life and to want to know my role in the universe. And I've set out on a quest to understand universal laws. I didn't know what they were, but it sounded cool. And then I went to start studying the various disciplines and started pursuing each of those disciplines. And I decided I was going to try to study 100 books and every known discipline. So that was a kind of a neurotic ambition, but it is what I pursued. And I wanted to find the common threads to those ologies, those disciplines. And that led me to what I think is the most universal of all laws. And I know it's going to sound abstract and almost metaphysical, but just like in the movie with John Nash, The Beautiful Mind, it's in the mysterious equation called love that we find the answers to the universe. And I define love as the synthesis and the synchronicity of all complementary opposites. In the very foundations of science, in cosmology, the origin of the universe, there's a belief that at the very beginning, when space and time were emerging, there was a perfect symmetry of opposites. Paul Dirac created particle and nanoparticle symmetries. In theology, the same thing is occurring. There's out of oneness comes the infinite possibilities that we have today. So at the core of science and the core of spiritual studies and religious traditions, there's a unity that gives rise to multiplicity. And whether we call it a creation or an emanationism, or whether we call it an evolvement, are just two different ways, a sensory-looking way or an abstract-looking way. We have what they call perceptions and conceptions to be able to identify that same origin. But either of those point to the same thing. Out of the one comes the many, and from the many come the one.
That's very insightful knowledge. And, to make this workable for our listeners, what we're hearing is there's a point of unconditionality. We're going to call it love. In science, sometimes we call it the Higgs boson, true? And the more closely we align ourselves with that point, then typically the more positive result we have in life. Is that fair to say?
Well, I always say that St. Augustine said that when the will of man matches the will of divine, he's blessed and he's graced and he feels fulfilled. Henry James said nothing of the senses will ever satisfy the soul except thank you, I love you, and the grace and love. So from a theological perspective, that makes sense. But from a scientific and physiological perspective, it still makes sense. Because gratitude, grace, and love are still the greatest healers on the planet. And I really think that in being a chiropractor as a background, chiropractic to me is the science and expression of love through the hands and through the heart and through the mind. So what we do is we add justment. We take add means move to center, just means move to balance, and ment means the mind. We're bringing the mind and the physiological repercussions and bringing them into balance and poise and presence and therefore purposefulness and power. And we connect man the physical with man the spiritual by doing it. And we take the science and we take the spirituality and we merge them together and we make a healing process.
That's fantastic. And so we sort of have a choice. In other words, whether we're graceful or in a state of gratitude or in a state of fear, guilt, anger, resentment, that's something that we can control, true? And I think we know in science now that when we're in a state of grace and gratitude and love, our body actually shows that it becomes more alkaline and more oxygenated, and we're more likely to be healthy and well. Is that true?
Absolutely. Our physiology is an expression of our psychology. And we have an autonomic nervous system which mediates the psychological perspectives through the physiological expressions. So if we perceive something that we're elated with or infatuated with, our parasympathetic nervous system comes online. If we get something that's challenging us and we're resenting it, our sympathetic comes online. And both of them create symptomatology as a feedback system to our psyche to let us know that we're imbalanced and we're not seeing things whole. We're having a conscious and unconscious split instead of a full conscious awareness. And the moment we have the full conscious awareness and that two is now one, we're back into the grace state. We have symmetry, we have proportion, and we have love. And I always say love is a confirmation that we're perceiving things as they are instead of imposing what we think they're supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Really wanted to touch on the fact that the core components of theology and science really there are parallels and resonate. It really goes back to the same situation or origin. We want to pause now. We're going to get into, after this break, really what is the emotional component to healing. And I believe that it could be possibly the most important component. We talk about our physical being and our biochemical being, and we're going to dive into our emotional being. But first, we're going to pause for our Natural Mom Minute. This has become a very popular segment on our podcast. So without further ado, here's Karen Aycock with your Natural Mom Minute.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Today I want to talk about primary food. We all know about the secondary food, which we eat to nourish our bodies, but I want to talk about these 4 areas considered to be primary food. The first one is your relationships. The second is your career. Then it's physical activity and your spirituality. These 4 areas have a huge impact on your health. Just think about this. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, living day in and day out, unhappy, your health will suffer. Same goes for a career. If you're going to a job you absolutely can't stand, you will eventually have bad health. We all know if we don't exercise, we're going to suffer consequences. And also your spirituality. Take time to connect. Spend time in the Word. It will do amazing things for your health. Remember, guys, your health depends on you.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for sharing. As always, you knock it out of the park by giving normal, everyday, average people tools that they can implement into their daily life to help create health and wellness. And speaking of health and wellness, again, we know we have a physical being and we have a biochemical being or situation, and there is an emotional component to health. There's a reason that 2 humans can have identical lab tests, yet have different outcomes. And so, Dr. Demartini, could you just share a little bit? I'd like to empower everybody on the call to understand that your conscious state or the things you choose to focus on and believe in and where you guide your emotions are going to be a determining factor in your health and wellness. Could you share a little bit about that, please?
Well, I was blessed when I was 4 years old to have a lovely lady named Mrs. Grubbs that lived next door to me, and she was out hoeing weeds out of her garden. She saw me pulling grass around the house, and she said, "Son, if you don't plant flowers in the garden of your mind, you're going to forever pull weeds." And I really believe that that's a very important component. If we don't fill our day with high-priority actions that inspire us, it fills up with low-priority distractions that don't. And those distractions create autonomic responses and physiological changes, which are symptomatologies that we then label illness. And the illness is a feedback mechanism to make sure we set priorities in our life and live authentically in life and live according to the grace state. So our body is a feedback mechanism guiding us to live authentically. And our subluxations in chiropractic are feedback mechanisms to help us guide ourselves back. The chiropractor is doing an adjustment not only from the neck up and the checkup and the neck up, but he's also adjusting the spine as a feedback mechanism to bring wellness. So the body and the mind are working for the fulfillment of, you might say, the very essence of our existence, which is our purpose in life.
So what I'm hearing is especially in the United States, we tend to be very materialistic and pay attention to things we can see, feel, touch, these types of things. And then what's happening now is we're getting diagnoses. You know, last year, every American was written 13 prescription medications. And I just feel like that if we had a better understanding that disease processes and symptomatology exist for a reason, and there is no randomness involved in the situation, that we're going to empower people to take more control. So what are some things that people can look to or to identify when really all they're staring at right now is a lab test or a X-ray that shows some sort of disease process? What I find is when people enter these disease states, their brains get consumed with how they've been labeled. So, do you have any advice for those people who may be suffering with different symptomatologies or disease processes to where they can sort of dive into the emotional side of what their outcome is going to be?
Well, I think this is a skill of applied physiology. I think the real healer is an applied physiologist. They go and study the body, the applied physiology, and look at what it's really saying instead of just treating symptoms. We have it in allopathic approach. We have a hedonistic approach. Get rid of the symptoms to feel good. But the problem with that is the feeling good stops us from becoming aware of what the body is trying to whisper to us. And so its wisdom is to actually study the physiology and know what it's trying to guide us to do. All of our symptoms are just responses trying to get us back into balance. If we don't know how to interpret it, the wisest thing to do is to eat wisely. I was talking to my son last night. There's no point in putting something into your body that's not real food. There's no point in putting into your body something that's not real water. There's no point in putting into your mind things that are not going to help you fulfill what's meaningful to you. So if we don't take command of priorities in our physiological actions and our psychological states, the world on the outside dictates our destiny, and we end up in the medical model. And I think that the medical model is a symptomatology model instead of a wholeness model. And recently there's some insights that's happened. They just changed the thing where they're not going to be applying antibiotics for colds and flus and bronchitis anymore. They're stopping it because they realize that that's caused superbugs and it's not actually treating anything and it's not helping anybody. And so they're now taking it off. So that's progress. Slowly but surely, the wisdom is surfacing. But the chiropractor's been trying to say that your body is trying to give you feedback. You know, if you pig out and you feel sluggish and tired and you got nasal congestion and you got cramps and bloat, it's not because you have a deficiency of antacids and antihistamines. It's because your body is trying to let you know you're not living wisely. If we ask the question, what is the feedback, what is the benefit of each of these symptoms, it will guide us to a better life as far as lifestyle. And I think that's what the chiropractor was trying to offer, an education with an adjustment to guide them to prevent the problems in the first place.
That's fantastic advice. So what I'm hearing, guys, is that, Dr. Demartini talks about the applied physiologist, where we're going to actually look at the function of the human body. And when you're out there looking for healthcare providers, make sure that somebody's paying attention to how your body's functioning as opposed to just how you're feeling. So, we do things like test the body's ability to adapt to stress. And actually, we just launched today in our office the ability to track extensive lab panels and see the function of different organs and biochemical markers. So that's great advice, and I really appreciate you sharing. Now, Dr. Demartini is one of the busiest individuals I've ever been around, and he actually paused another interview to spend some time with us on this podcast. And I mean, just in this short few minutes, there's so much knowledge. Gosh, we could probably break this down over hours and hours and maybe even weeks. So do you have anything else you want to leave the audience with, Dr. Demartini?
Well, I just want to say that whoever's listening out there, you want to give yourself permission to do something extraordinary in the world. Because the real you, not the one that you're subordinating to from outside pressures and social idealism, but the real you is a very magnificent, very dedicated, very service-oriented, very caring individual. So prioritize your life, fill your day with high-priority things, delegate lower-priority things, live wisely, don't impulse. Think ahead, plan ahead, think ahead, and give yourself permission to go after what you really would love in life. If you're not doing what you love and loving what you're doing and delegating lower-priority things in life, you're going to create symptoms in your body that let you know that. If you're not filling your diet with quality food, your day with quality thoughts, you're going to get symptoms to try to guide you. The purpose of the chiropractor is to guide you through an adjustment physically and to guide you with an adjustment psychologically to the most profound you. And that's the person you want to give permission to let out to the world.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. And again, that goes back to the point of this podcast is that you deserve to live a high quality of life. And you were put on this planet to do something special. And, you're going to need your health and wellness. And if you've lost it in certain areas, it's just an indicator, just a wake-up call. Be grateful for that. And utilize folks like Dr. Demartini and myself and many of the other guests we've had to help guide you in that direction because we've dedicated our lives to doing so. So, Dr. Demartini, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to finish up the podcast, and I'll keep you on the line for just about 1 or 2 minutes to debrief a little bit here. But, guys, again, this has been another episode of Wellness Works. Remember, we're here to help you live as high a quality of life for as long as possible, and we're here to help provide information. We're here to help guide you to providers across the country and around the world so that you, too, can live as high a quality of life as humanly possible. Thank you, guys, for joining, and look forward to our next podcast. God bless you. Have a great week.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Wellness Works with Dr. Kris McClusky. If this message spoke to you, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share with a friend or loved one.